Hello, hello, and welcome to another Christmas episode of the Mid Ulster Tuesday Night Lecture. We are really privileged to have with us Tim Golf Whiskey 4 Victor X-Ray Echo, and he's going to be speaking to us this evening on further adventures in VHF and UHF. Now, just a point that we won't be on 2 weeks from now, so we won't be on the fourth Tuesday of this month, being December. But we're taking a little break, and we're going to enjoy Christmas. But we will be kicking off again on the second Tuesday, as always, in January. So do look out for the adverts there on Facebook and on our website. And if you want to be added to our email mailing list, do send us an email. Go over to our website, www.muarc.com. We look at the club secretary's email address, and we can add you onto our mail shot. So, Tim, if you want to unmute yourself there, you can tell us a little bit about yourself and where are you? We know you're in Wales somewhere,
Well, just over the water, really, Dave. You know, it's we can see Ireland on a clear day, a very clear day, I should say. But no, hi everyone. Really nice to be with you this evening. I'm only sorry that I can't come and see you in person because it's part of the world that I haven't visited yet. So we'll have to put that right sometime when all this is behind us. That would be really nice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so yeah, we're in West Wales, near the ferry port of Fishguard, which as you know has a ferry over to the south, and we've been here just over a year. I was in Oxfordshire before, and I managed to escape a corporate life in London, and start doing some freelance stuff, which is much more fun, and actually it's worked out really well. So I feel really lucky. Radio-wise, well, I'm lucky enough to write for Practical Wireless. I do a VHF, UHF column for them. For Radio User, I do a couple of columns. One is called Signals from Space, which is kind of anything satellite or spacey type related. And there's a forthcoming new column, which I'm sure I can mention to you, about two-way radio generally, which should be quite fun to write, I think. And also lucky enough to play with bits of kit for Radcom and PW. So that's kind of it. I've always been keen on VHF, UHF operation. I got my G4 back in 1983, at the end of 1983. And I think I got on 77s before I got on HF, which was a bit unusual in those days. So yeah, so that's kind of a bit about the background. And do you want me to kick off into the talk, Dave, or?
Absolutely, Tim. Very much so. It's over to you. So we're ready there, and we're ready and listening. Tim, over to you.
Fabulous, thank you. And it's lovely to see. I sort of paged through the screens, and there's some very familiar call signs there. So really nice to see you all, and thank you for tuning in, shall we say. So what I'm going to try and do is share my screen. Usually this works. As I say, usually. Let's do that. There we go. Yeah, just hopefully you can see that. Thumbs up or something. Yay. Fabulous, thank you. So further adventures with your VHF UHF station. This chat sort of kind of follows on from a talk I did in the RSGB's Tonight at 8 series, probably 6 weeks ago or so, which was very much an introduction to VHF. And a few people said, oh, well, we really like the idea of Zoom talks. And I really like the idea of Zoom talks as well. It's so nice to be able to join people like you guys where you are. And I, love watching talks from presenters who wouldn't normally be able to, visit the sort of part of the world that you're in. So I thought, well, it'd be really nice to do a Zoom talk. So this one kind of follows on a little bit, and it's further adventures with your VHF UHF station. So it's kind of a few things that maybe you might be interested to try. And I suppose what I wanted to do was to convince you, if I needed to convince you, that VHF UHF is more than for local chatting, although it's brilliant for that, of course. We all know it works really well for chatting across town, or a few miles or whatever. But I think tonight we'll look at a few things which hopefully will extend the range of your VHF UHF station, or at least maybe try and get a little bit more out of it. Although looking down the list of call signs, I know some of you do all this stuff already, so there may not be anything too much new. But anyway, I'll hope it be fun in any case. The other thing I want to do is try and convince you not to listen to those people that say there's no activity on VHF UHF. I'm sure you have them. Where I used to live in Oxfordshire, one of the local repeaters was actually populated by a really lovely guy whose call sign is quite well known, so I won't mention it. But he always used to be bemoaning how little activity there was on the repeater. Actually, there wasn't little activity on the repeater. I just don't think he was on that often. And possibly the sound of his moaning voice claiming that there was no activity on the repeater didn't help very much either. Yeah, there is loads of activity on VHF. It might just not be quite where you thought it was. So first thing I wanted to, by the way, if you wonder why I'm looking around slightly nervously from time to time, one of the cats, Bailey, it can be a little bit feisty at times, and she's sort of round the chair legs. I think this is where she wanted to sit, and she didn't want me to sit here. So if there's a yelp and you see me crash back into the nice dresser behind me, you know what's happened. Anyway, so 6 meters. There's some sporadic E, of course, is very, very well known in the summer. Usually starts off in late April, maybe May, runs through May, June, July, and generally peters out in about August. But what not everybody knows is that there's quite a decent wintry season. It's not as spectacular perhaps as the summer season, but it can be quite interesting. And I have started to notice 1 or 2 openings over the last little while, so hopefully we'll start to see some 6 meter E's before too long. Actually, last winter, you'd think I'd know the difference, wouldn't you? Last winter, we moved here and I didn't have any aerials up, and actually I had one of these inflatable aerials. I don't know if you've seen them, but had a bit of fun, and I thought, well, there was a nice opening going on Troppo, and I thought, well, I ought to be able to try and work something. So I threw up one of these inflatable aerials and brought the coax in through the window, and worked 1 or 2 Troppo stations, which was really nice. But I think it was somewhere around Boxing Day or the 27th of December, and I was just monitoring 2 meters on FT8, and I suddenly saw a couple of Polish stations pop up. Oh wow, that's really surprising. And actually, believe it or not, with 50 watts from the FT847 to the inflatable aerial out on the front at about 6 feet above ground, I did actually manage to work one of them. So that was one of the first sporadic E contacts I made from here. So I was really pleased with that. But 6-metre openings are a lot more common than 2-metre openings at Christmas. So you should be able to find some of those. I've said 27, 28 megs might give you a clue. Some people are occasionally a bit shocked that I mentioned 27 megs, but because the guys on 27 megs tend to operate a lot more intensively than we do on 10 meters, frequencies like 27.555 or some of the CEPT channels can give you a really good idea of what's coming in. So if you're starting to hear French and German stations on those bands, maybe the MUF is probably going quite high. So that can be really interesting. Other places you can get some clues about what's going on with propagation. G7IZU's website, which I'll put a URL down there. By the way, if anybody wants the slides rather than trying to sort of scribble down things of this, if anybody wants a copy of the slides, I'm more than happy to send them over to you. So just drop me a line if you'd like them, or I can send them to Dave and he can do some magic from there. Thanks, Dave. So yeah, G7IZU's got a nice website which sort of plots the propagation taken off the DX clusters, I think, and gives an idea of where the East reflecting area is. Another website which is really useful is PropQuest, which is the brainchild of Jim Bacon, G3YLA, who I'm sure you know, and Jim's put a really nice web page together, which gives you a likelihood of sporadic E indicators. So those can be good friends in terms of flushing out what's going on. Digital modes, I'm thinking of FT8 in particular, do give you a great advantage, because even if signals are quite weak, you can make some interesting contacts. Ooh. I thought I was mentioning digital modes and I got muted for mentioning digital modes for it. It's okay. So yeah, it does gives you a good advantage, and of course there's plenty of activity there as well. So yeah, look out for some winter E's. The other thing that could be interesting over the next month or so, starting around now, is meteor scatter. There's a couple of meteor showers which are reasonably significant. The Geminids is this month. I think it starts about the 4th or 5th of December and peaks somewhere around the 14th, as I recall. I certainly have noticed some reflections already on 2 meters from the Geminids, some quite big reflections. So it's all starting to happen. But 6 meters will show even better sort of meteor type propagation. And when conditions are good around the peak of the shower, particularly the peak of the quadrantids, I think, in early January, you can make contacts on meteor scatter with something like 50 or 100 watts to either a dipole or a vertical. In fact, sometimes the signals are so strong, it's kind of, is it sporadic E or is it meteor scatter? you never really know, but generally you sort of have a quick look and find that there aren't any E's clouds around, and it's meteor scatter. So on 6 meters, which is where you'll probably find it most fun to start, the MSK 144 mode is mostly used. And that's a mode that's available in the WSJTX software, which you're potentially already using for FT8. The other software which has MSK144 in, is the MSHV software written by LZ2HV, which somehow I slightly prefer for meteor scatter activity. I'm not really sure why, but I kind of do. There's a couple of 6 meter frequencies for MSK144 on 6, 5280, which is where most of the activity is, and I think 50.314 as well. I think it's one of these situations where there's an IARU suggested frequency, and there's a kind of de facto frequency that everybody kind of uses and doesn't take too much notice. But actually, there is activity on both frequencies, but I think 280 is generally a little bit more active. So if you've not played with Meteor Scatter, the way it kind of works is that it's a bit like a very, very brief sporadic e-opening. So you have, I don't know, maybe a bit of sand, a bit of meteoric dust or something like that. You know, we're certainly not talking about, you know, the meteorites from sci-fi films coming through the atmosphere. So, you know, do not be afraid. It's okay. So you get these little bits of meteoric dust coming through the ionosphere. They burn up and cause some ionization to go on, and of course you can reflect your signals off that. And reflections on 6 meters are a lot longer than on 2 meters. You know, on 2 meters, the majority of reflections out of a major shower are probably sub-second. We'd call them pings. And you know, historically, when you were in the old days when we were operating high-speed CW, you just would hear this sort of bing type noise, or on SSB you might just hear a fragment of voice coming through, perhaps. But on 6 meters, you know, the reflections tend to be quite a bit longer, and that makes life a little bit easier. So in terms of MSK144 on 6 meters, 15-second periods are used. It's nice to keep them nice and short, so that if you've got a nice long reflection going on, you can complete potentially on one burst, which is really good fun. If you're monitoring 5280, you might well see people calling CQ with a number afterwards, and that indicates that they're operating split. So I might be calling CQ on 5280 with 284, and that means that I'm listening on 5284 for any replies. That sounds like it might be a bit of a pain software-wise, but actually all you have to do is double-click on the line that says CQ284 GW4VXE. And assuming that your program is talking to your radio via the CAT control, it will automatically QSY you onto 5284 so that you can call me and you'll be on the right frequency. So that works really well, and of course it helps keep the calling frequency nice and clear. And you know, it's unless things are going really fast, it's not particularly good etiquette to work people on the calling frequency 280. With a simple station, you know, if you've got a dipole or a vertical, I'd suggest you potentially only call stations that you're hearing quite a lot from. So, you know, if you're hearing 2 or 3 reflections every period from the station, well, that's pretty good going, and give them a call, and you stand a really good chance of working them. If you're only hearing a reflection from them every 5 minutes or so, then if you've got a simple station, then you're probably unlikely to be quite so successful. Incidentally, if you've got a beam up for 6 meters and, you know, 50 or 100 watts, you'll be able to make lots of nice meteor scatter QSOs. So if you haven't done that, if you haven't tried that, do recommend it, and it's not a bad time of year to give it a go. All right. So, how about a bit of 2 meter and 70 sems DX? But this time it's for people who haven't got sideband type rigs. So perhaps you've got an FM rig, maybe a dual bander, or even a handheld, perhaps. That you can connect up to an external or a loft aerial, and you can have some fun with this. Because of course, what happens is there's lots of fleeting little openings that occur on VHF, UHF. Sometimes it might be down to aircraft scatter. We'll talk a little bit more about that in later on, but it might be a brief tropo opening as a bit of weather goes through, and so on. It happens more often than you might think. So what I'd suggest you do is program in all the repeater and simplex channels into your rig. The ones that are the most interesting are the channels that are usually quiet, that you haven't got a local repeater on. Of course, what then happens when you're in the shack, pop the rig on scan, and see what comes up, and you'll be surprised. The channels that are normally quiet, once in a little while you'll a signal will come up, and you think, what's that? I wonder. If you're lucky, it'll send an ID, or you'll get some clue about what it is, and find out where it is, and that works amazingly. My best story of doing that is when I was back in Oxfordshire. We had a reasonably good location. I was up on a hill which is about 300 feet above sea level, which isn't terribly high, but there wasn't a lot around us. And I had the rig going on scan one afternoon on FM, and it stopped on this channel on 2 meters. And I wouldn't say I'm a great linguistic expert, but I know most languages around. I wouldn't say I can speak them, but I kind of recognise most of the languages around the close bits of Europe. And I thought, I don't know, I have no clue what that language is. And so I'm going to make somebody smile with this. I can see with the attendees, and I don't know what it is. And anyway, the chat went on, and I suppose it went on for about 15 minutes. And thank goodness for CWIDs, because after a little time, the ID came up. And Peter, of course, it was a repeater in the southwestern side of Norway, and I was utterly amazed to hear that coming through. And I thought, well, I'm going to rush down onto sideband, put the beam over towards Norway, and call CQ. And of course, nobody came back. It was all quiet. And I suppose the opening lasted about half an hour, and then the signals just faded into the noise. So that was, completely fascinating. And I suppose I can't remember now the call sign of the repeater. I do remember that it was in the southwestern tip of Norway, and perhaps it was very well sighted, and the tropo duct was only favouring stations at that particular altitude or something like that. But that was really interesting. And other openings I've caught repeaters down in the Alps, or the Pyrenees in France, which is you can say, oh well, it's not DX via a repeater, but actually, if your 50 watts and a vertical is getting you down to a Pyrenees in a repeater in the Pyrenees, I'm pretty cool that's DX actually, even if the station you're working at the other end is coming in through a repeater and isn't direct. So I find that really interesting, and if you've got FM kit, then that might be something to try. And I will say it's particularly interesting if you're quite near the coast, because openings, as many of you know, as the sea heats up and cools down, you can have some really interesting propagation effects on VHF, UHF. From here, and I know from some parts of the north, you get some brilliant marine ducts up and down the sea. So some quite spectacular stuff can happen at times. Okay, so that's FM. So what about VHF, UHF, FT8 with a simple station? Usually around this point in the talk, somebody rises up and says, "I don't like FT8, I like SSB and CW," and that's fine. Completely get that. But what I would say is do humour me, because there are some possibilities, and I'll talk about what you might be able to achieve, and you can see if you find that interesting. So what do you need? Well, have you got something like a 25 or a 50 watt multi-mode rig, an interface that will allow you to get the rig to talk to your computer, and perhaps a vertical antenna? Well, if you have, you can work VHF, UHF, DX as well, and we'll talk about that in a second. Of course, I'm not trying to say throw your beams away, not at all. But what I am saying is, if you haven't got a beam, have a go with what you've got, and you'll be really surprised. And I'll tell you my story of how I was really surprised with all this stuff in a few moments. But what I would say is, if you love finding out about propagation, which I really do, that's one of my big interests in amateur radio, is propagation. And even after, I don't know, is it 38 years I've been licensed or something like that? So it's scary. I was very young when I started, and I'm still finding out new stuff, and it's really interesting. So what might you be able to take advantage of with a simple station like we're talking about? Well, tropo openings, fleeting ones like we were just talking about, long ones as well, the ones that go on for days when there's a lovely big high pressure around, perhaps in the summer. Aircraft scatter, well, yeah, that's a thing, and there's I and you guys are very well placed for aircraft scatter. There's well, at least generally, a lot of aircraft going over our heads to either Ireland or North America, that we can bounce signals off on 2 meters and 70 cent in particular. Sporadic E, well, yeah, you can work some sporadic E with the simple station. Meteor scatter, maybe you won't make some QSOs, but you'll certainly hear meteor reflections with something like a vertical antenna on 2 meters if you're using FT8. I suppose I should mention very quickly the mindset. Do be patient. If you've done some data mode stuff on HF, then it is kind of different. Generally on HF, the contacts go back and forth pretty quickly. You might get 1 or 2 repeats, but generally, if on HF, if it's more than 1 or 2 repeats, people seem to give up. It's a bit sad, really. But on VHF, some contacts might take 15 minutes in difficult conditions. And I had a lovely example of that last night. Actually, I was had the beam over to the northeast from here, and I saw Derek G8ECI, who's up in on the other side of the country in Lincolnshire, calling CQ and on 2, and I hadn't worked him, and I wanted to. And he was peaking up on aircraft scatter, and it took us about 20 minutes to complete the contact with signals completely vanishing in between each other copying our signals. So that was really interesting. So, don't give up straight away, particularly if the other station is a long way away. So yeah, I wanted to tell you about my experience on 2 meters FT8. It sort of goes back to when people were just starting to use FT8 on 2 meters. And I saw a tweet from Jason GW4VXE, who's in Bristol, and he was talking about working FT8 on 2 meters. I thought, oh, and he had a screen full of stuff, and it was PAs and DLs, and I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. I should give that a go. The only thing my beam was broken at the time. There was a bit of an incident about trying to put too much power through it, and it wasn't quite up to it. So anyway, and it was a right pain to get the aerial off the mast where we were in Oxfordshire. So anyway, that was unusable. But I did have a vertical up, so I thought, well, if I have a listen with the vertical, I ought to be able to hear something. In the various UK activity contests, I'd always been able to work stations 30 miles away or whatever on sideband. So I figured, well, FT8, I ought to be able to do at least that. So I went on one evening, and I think I worked a station. It was Martin G0GMB who runs the National Radio Centre over at Bletchley Park. So I think it was about 30 odd miles away or so, and I figured, oh well, that kind of worked all right. But one evening I thought, well, I should have another go and see what happens. So I put a message up on Twitter saying that, calling CQ on FT8 on 144.174. And I was utterly astonished to be called by Richard GW1JFE, who's a great mate and lives about 10 or 15 miles from here. But when I was in Oxfordshire, Richard was about 250k away from me. It was just under 250 kilometres, the path. And I was utterly astonished because I knew that Richard only had a vertical and about 50 watts. And I wouldn't have expected, and conditions were nothing special that evening. He wasn't strong, but he was copyable, and we completed a QSO quite easily. And what was really interesting over the next 18 months, 2 years before I went QRT in Oxfordshire, I was regularly able to work Richard. In fact, the days that were more interesting were almost the days where we couldn't work because we wondered what was going on. And in fact, there were times that we could actually see each other's signals on the FT8 waterfall, but we couldn't decode. And we realised that was actually when there was rain over some of the Welsh mountains, causing dispersion to take place, and you could see the signals, but and until that rain cloud moved, you couldn't complete the QSO. So that was really interesting, and we discovered, over those very many QSOs, the signal strengths varied between something like +5 on, or down to -21 or even less. And one evening we'd swapped some great signals. I think it was +5 both ways or something like that. And I said to Richard, well, should we try SSB? Well, let's see what it's like. See if we can work vertical to vertical on SSB. Given that we had a really good path on FT8. So I gave him a call on SSB, and we were able to work, which was really interesting. But what was fascinating, bearing in mind this was a day when signals were really good on FT8. They were +5. We were 4 and 1 with each other, so we could swap call signs. We could swap reports and locators and all that sort of stuff. But it certainly wasn't what you'd call a reliable signal path. So that gave me a really good idea of how effective this was on FT8. So the other thing that I found really interesting was the little transient openings. I would very often see F6APE, who's down in IN97 in the west of France, as an Atlantic weather front would come in. I sort of typically always think of tropo weather as being nice, high pressure, calm, hot weather, all those sorts of things. But what I realised is that there are actually a lot of openings as you get an Atlantic front coming in, and you actually tend to get propagation along that front. And F6APE was one of the guys that I very often see coming up in signal strength as one of these fronts came in. So that was always good fun. And there are all sorts of other lovely QSOs that I used to work a guy in near Calais, Patrick F5BZU, and it was those were really lovely QSOs, because I probably worked him something like 50 or 100 times. So we tended to call each other when we heard each other. It was another interesting path to explore. And what was great was that he doesn't speak much English, and I don't speak very much French, but we were able to swap some lovely emails with the aid of Google Translate, and explore the QSOs that we were having. So that was really nice. I haven't worked him from here. I'm really hoping I will. It's a lot further, but I'm sure it has to be possible. So to give you an idea of the sort of coverage that I got with my vertical on 50 watts of FT8, that's not the entire squares map, but there were some outliers as well from there, including some nice sporadic ones, but a lot of that is on Tropo, which is pretty remarkable. I was certainly did work GI. I know I worked Gordon GI680Z very many times. George, I'm not sure if we worked GI4SJQ. I know we've worked from here, but I'm not sure. We may well have done. I should have checked from Oxfordshire, but it was certainly possible to do that and into Southern Ireland as well. And I guess I should mention the sporadic EQSOs as well. I started off with a bit of an inferiority complex in the sporadic E openings, and I thought, 50 watts to a vertical, I'm never going to work any DX on sporadic E, and saw a few people come up, and then I had an email from a guy who wrote into PW, and he told me about the 2 meter sporadic E opening that he'd worked with I think it was 10 watts to a V2000 vertical, and he'd worked loads of nice stuff, and I thought, yeah, fantastic. Next opening I was a bit more confident and actually called some people and made some nice QSOs. And actually the really nicest QSO I had, I was monitoring the band one morning, and it was one of the, it was sort of mid-sporadic E season. We've been working lots of stuff on 6 meters and flicking between 6 and 2 meters. And I saw on the screen CQ from SV Sugar Victor to Juliet Lima in KN10. And I didn't jump on it quite as quickly as I would have done normally, because I thought, it's 6 meters. No, it's not 6 meters, it's 2 meters. And, I gave him a call. And to my complete surprise, we were able to make a QSO, and that was fantastic. I'd never worked grease on 2 meters before, let alone using such a simple aerial. So so that was brilliant. So some final thoughts on simple FTA operating on VHF, UHF. The approach obviously works best if you're in the centre of activity. Now, I don't know whether you class where you are as a centre of activity, but you are actually close to quite a lot of stations, in the north of England, across the water and so on. So I think plenty of QSOs should be possible. I'm definitely not saying throw away your VHF, UHF beams. You don't need them, but I am saying you don't necessarily need them to make some really interesting contacts, which I think, in the past, I don't know, 35, 40 years or whatever, since when I've been reading VHF stuff, it's, you have to put up a beam to work DX on 2 meters, and I think it works out that you probably don't need that. So whatever you've got, give it a go. Don't be put off by the people that say it won't work, or that's just their experience. It will work, and it's really interesting to try. I suppose something about VHF, UHF, FT8 operation, I would say be a good neighbour. Look at which period your locals are using to transmit, and if you can stay on the same period as them to avoid being a stonking great signal wiping out their waterfall, then that's a nice sociable sort of thing to do. You will read people saying, oh, you should only transmit in the first period, and so on and so forth. Well, that doesn't really work, does it? Because it depends what direction you're beaming in, and there will always be people in the opposite period that you want to work. So so just try not to shoot your locals in the foot, and you'll get on nicely that way. 70 SEMS FT8 is worth a go as well. Have a look on 432.174, particularly if there's a bit of tropo going on. It does work. It is harder work than 2 meters. I don't really know why, but it does seem disproportionately harder work than 2 meters. But I did make some nice QSOs from Oxfordshire with a vertical on 70 SEMS into Germany, as I recall. Not sure about Spain, can't remember now. From here with a vertical, I have worked down to the Canaries on 70 SEMS, which about 3,000, just under 3,000 K. So that's quite nice. I have even heard the guys on Cape Verde with a vertical on 70 SEMS, but I haven't managed to work them yet. May need to throw up a beam to do that, and then try and do it on the vertical. But yeah, 70 SEMS is really interesting, and of course with the wider availability of 1296 megs, lots of transverters around, and the IC 9700 being quite popular. Some people are trying FT8 on there, and that's I think proving quite successful, although you may find that on the higher bands, 70 SEMS as well, you get a little bit more dispersion, which might mean that you can see the FT8 signals on your waterfall, but they won't decode. So if you get situations where something like that's going on, you might find some of the wider, I think it's JT9 modes, JT9G, F and G maybe, might perhaps be a little bit more successful. So there we are, some simple VHF, UHF, DX on FT8. I wanted to throw this one in. I had a sudden thought this afternoon. What else can I tell you about the crossband repeater on the ISS? Was turned on again a couple of days ago, and it's something that you can maybe listen for with some fairly simple equipment. So how does it work? Well, the uplink is on 2 meters, 145990. You need 67 hertz CTCSS on your transmission. The downlink is on 437-800. That's the nominal frequency. As it approaches, always from the west, coming towards us, you'll first hear it about 10 kcs high of that frequency. So it'll appear about 437.810. As it comes overhead, it'll be down to about 437-800, and then by the time it goes out over the southeastern horizon, it'll be down to 437-790. Lovely illustration of Doppler shift. You don't need to worry about Doppler shift on the uplink. It'll move a maximum of 1 or 2 kcs, and the AFC on the receiver will take care of that just fine. So you can leave your uplink frequency on 145.990. It tends to be insanely busy with all sorts of people trying to get into the thing, and we can argue about whether it's actually a great advertisement for amateur radio or not, but so it does get really busy. But the good news for you and for me is that we're nicely out to the west, and we will see the ISS several minutes before mainland Europe will see. So we actually have a good chance to access the crossband repeater before it gets too busy. Once again, if you've got something like a white stick vertical or a vertical or whatever, try listening on the low passes. If you have a listen on the passes that are out to the southwest, that come up to about 10 degrees or even just 1 or 2 degrees above the horizon, you'll be surprised. You'll probably hear the repeater come up, and you'll probably be able to get through it with 10, 15 watts or so to a vertical, and you should be able to work down into Spain or Portugal, potentially the Canaries or the Azores, depending on who's on. So maybe give that a go. It is very busy, but if you pick the right time, you can make some nice QSOs, and it's just kind of interesting to hear in any case. The crossband repeater, by the way, it alternates in operation. Some of the time the ISS is this particular radio, which is in the one segment, I think it's in the Columbus module. It shares its time between doing this repeater and also APRS on 145.825 on packet. The part of the transmitter on the ISS that does the SSTV that perhaps you see from time to time, and the school's contacts, or some of the school's contacts is in the Russian part of the space station. Although I think they do some school's contacts from the Columbus module as well. So anyway, have a listen for the crossband repeater. I think the ISS is coming over in the afternoon at the moment, so have a look at some passes there, and you might hear something interesting. So there we are. That was kind of mostly what I was going to say. So in summary, VHF, UHF is brilliant for talking to people across town, but I hope I've convinced you that there might be some different things to look at as well. Digital modes, may not be your favourite thing, but you can do an awful lot with them, and they're a huge advantage to a small station. And of course, you can, use non-digital modes when you want to. I suppose I predominantly use FT8 on VHF, but I spend quite a bit of time, tuning around 80 meters on CW for my legacy mode fix, shall we say? No, it's not really legacy mode, but you know what I mean. And I suppose the other message I wanted to give was, you know, although it's brilliant to have lots of fancy equipment, it's always fun to have it. You don't need lots of that stuff to make some really interesting contacts, and you can probably have some really interesting QSOs with the kit that you've already got. So there we are. I hope that was interesting, and I look forward to seeing you on the air. Thank you for listening.
Great stuff, Peter. Great stuff. Or Tim, even. I don't know why I've called you Peter when your name's not Peter. It's definitely Tim. It really has been very interesting there, and a great topic of definitely there's many adventures to have in VHF, UHF, and a way for one of sort of without any sort of labels have shied away from the whole FT8 thing and everything else. But evenings, I guess, definitely brings the idea back in, and I think maybe I should, It could be quite interesting, especially hearing yourself talking about the distances and the interest in QSOs and everything else. Before I open the floor there to any questions, Tim, what's the furthest QSO you've had, or is there one particular that steps out and you think, or stands out and you think, that was fantastic?
Well, yeah, you know, that QSO I mentioned with SVJL on 2 meter sporadic E was a really nice one. But actually, you know, one of the really memorable ones was actually this summer after we'd moved to Wales, and you know, I had a feeling that from here the path down to Cape Verde ought to work, but you know, until you hear it for yourself, you're never quite sure. And Julie and I were out. I think it was during lockdown, I remember, and Julie and I were out for a walk. You know, we weren't allowed to sort of drive away from the place at the time, so that we could, you know, go for a walk. And I was out for a walk, and we were about sort of 5 or 6 miles away from home, up one of the local hills, and I had a text message from Andy GW4VXE, who's a few miles away from me, and he said, "Oh, you know, D4 VHF is on 2 meters. I just worked them." So, you know, we walked those few miles back very, very quickly. And I think I had the 6 meter beam up at the time, so that was very quickly taken down, and I put a tiny little 2 meter beam up and pointed it down to the southwest, and worked D4 VHF without any trouble at all, which, you know, was amazing. Anyway, it was, you know, it was the sporadic E season. I thought, well, I want to get that back on 6 meters. So so, you know, the QSO was safely in the log, and I plugged the 2 meter vertical back in, and went back outside and swapped the 2 meter beam back out. When I got back into the shack, I could see that I'd been listening on vertical, and I could still copy D4 VHF on the vertical antenna. So yeah, so I managed to work them with the vertical as well. So that's it's about 4,300K or so. So that was, yeah, that blew my mind.
So not just local, you know. Anyone else have any questions there you want to ask him? Work away. Okay, Les, I seen you first there. Go ahead.
Hi, Tim. Very good summary of some exciting stuff there. Here's a question. Every time I pick up the advertisements in Radcom, there's a new VHF, UHF rig, a new mode. It seems to be changing very quickly for an old guy like me, you know, who remembers valves. You know, before the three-legged fuse that came along after the valves. So here's my question. If I have a son who's interested in amateur radio and he wants to start off with a VHF or UHF rig, what would you recommend him to choose? Or rather, as I suspect this is more complex, how would he go about making a choice of a radio?
It's a really good question.
What's the logic of the process of choosing your first VHF, UHF radio?
It's a complete nightmare. It used to be that you could get VHF rigs that were single banders, and that seemed to stop happening. 6 meters tends to get bundled with HF. So the IC 7300 is a lovely choice for HF, a lovely choice for 6 meters and for 4 meters, and that seems to work pretty well for most people. But then you go higher in frequency, and what do you do from there? The FT847 is what I use, but it's quite long in the tooth. I've probably had that. I don't want to think about how long I've had it, 25 years or so. You see the IC 9700, which looks a nice shiny rig as well, but it's not without its problems. Some people I know haven't got on with them well at all. What do you do with in that instance? I think a lot of people have on 2 meters and 70 sems have used something like the FT857 and 897. I think they work reasonably well. I think the 857 on 70 sems is 25 watts, so it's it's not huge power there.
35.
Works all right on. Is it? Thank you. On 2 meters, it seems to work okay. So rigs like that may be a choice. And it's really difficult. Some people are setting up transverters, but I do know transverters are such a faff, aren't they? It sort of ties up an HF rig or something like that. So I wish I had a magic answer. I don't really, I hope that the manufacturers will fill the void, but they probably won't. I think the 6 meter stuff is pretty often banded with HF, so that's pretty well covered now. But the 2 meter 70 sems, the Yaesu rigs like the 991 and so on all cover it. I don't know how well they work. I haven't had a chance to try them, so yeah. I wish I had a good answer for you, but I don't.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Simon, go ahead. I think you're on mute there, Simon.
The bottom.
Oh, there we go.
It's not on my little thing at the top. Right. Hi. Thanks, Tim. And great. What is there any? It's something which I think you've sort of touched on, but is there any sort of standard for timings? Who goes first? A little bit like the old Meteor scatter and EME and that, because I was fortunate. Part of one of the West Tyrone radio group, we tried the Atlantic Challenge, and we did actually hear, and as you rightly said, a week of just looking at waterfall displays was a little bit, but the 100-foot long 2 meter antenna worked a treat. But one of the things I remember from there, it was quite obvious that there was an issue of timing and that. So the group from the Isle of Man wanted to transmit first. So they always seem to come on 10 seconds before the time and that sort of thing. So it sort of mixes up with another question about timings and getting accurate timings, and for instance, if you were going portable and that sort of thing, because these weak signal modes and this sort of thing is great, as you rightly said, with not so much power, and you know. So can you say anything about that?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Simon, and thanks for the question. Yeah, as you say, timing is really important, and being 10 seconds off on FT8 is terminal. On maybe a minute or 30-second Meteor scatters. It may not be quite so bad, but you're still wasting time. So yeah, it's really important that you can synchronize the timing of your PC. There is a time service built into Windows, but it's generally not really adequate, because it probably syncs every 12 hours or something like that, and PC clocks will actually drift quite a long way in half an hour, let alone 12 hours. So don't rely on that. But there's some nice time synchronization software that you can stick on your PC that will keep your clock fairly well tied to a standard. You raised a great point about, well, what do you do if you're operating portable? Well, fortunately, I think our mobile networks are good enough these days that you'll still find that the synchronization should be close enough that there's not too much network latency. So that will probably work okay. I must admit, I haven't tried one of the client. The client I tend to use, by the way, I think it's called Dimension 4D4. There's a time server, but there's some other ones around as well. Just look for NTP Sync for Windows, and you'll find something useful, I think. Yeah, I haven't tried it mobile, but I think it would, as long as you've got a fairly decent connection, I think that should work okay.
What about the sort of who goes first? Whether it's on odd minutes, or is there a sort of a thing on that? Because you said at the beginning there's a bit where everybody suddenly goes.
Yeah, I kind of pull my face at that. Yeah, it's a bit like and everybody everybody over on the East Coast says, oh, it's like the old Meteor scatter thing. If you're beaming east, you transmit in the first period or whatever. Well, that's fine if you're beaming east. So what do you do if you're beaming
east and beaming west?
if you're beaming west and you're a few miles away from the guy beaming east, you're going to be giving him a whole load of QRM. So I must admit, I tend to work more on the basis of just trying not to shoot the guy in the foot a little bit. It does on 6 meters in the summer, with openings to Japan and North America, then I think it's really good to try and stay on the same period as everyone else, and occasionally you will get people transmitting on an opposite period, and there's no hassle in going on quickly and working them. But if you can by and large stay on the same period as everyone else, then that works really well. But yeah, the sort of beaming east thing, it's particularly a problem if you've got a vertical. What do you do then?
Right, fair enough. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Good question.
John, I seen you stick your hand up the last time there. If you want to go ahead.
Yep, can you hear me okay?
Yes, John, hi.
How you doing, Tim? I seen you on TX Factor there not that long ago, and I've always been interested in the VHF side of things more than the HF. I like HF, but I definitely enjoy the VHF and the 70 SEMS knowledge. I don't have much of it yet, but I'm building it up slowly. I have a couple of questions, if you wouldn't mind helping me out with the answers. I've a reason for asking this question. In the first picture, you had a picture of a Yagi and a picture of a log periodic. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
The question is going to ask you, in your experience, which works better for 2 meters and 70 cms?
So I'll explain the use case. I suppose you know, for a particular band, I would probably always go with the monoband Jargy. You know, so if I'm operating on 2 meters, I would probably rather have a 2 meter beam than a log periodic, because it just feels like you're going to get a bit more performance out of it. It kind of feels that.
Okay.
And I'll then talk around why I think that might not necessarily be true, and it might be better than I think. So that would be my sort of default position. So the log periodic that I showed you, I use that. It's an ELK log periodic. It's 2 meters and 70 cms, and I use that for portable satellite operating. So you'll be, for example, listening on 2 meters and transmitting on 70 cms, and you just want one aerial rather than sort of waving two aerials around. So that can be quite a nice choice, rather than, you know, perhaps having a cross Jargy or something like that. So it works really well in that instance. And the other, you know, thing I was going to say, there's a guy, a Ukrainian guy who's the captain of a ship, Captain Yuri, UT1FG, and he operates maritime mobile from all over the place. And he was out in the Atlantic quite recently, and I made some 2 meter Meteor scatter contacts with him. Well, what's exceptional about that is that Captain Yuri, who was off the Azores at the time, was using one of those little log periodic antennas, sort of lashed to the side of the ship, you know, pointing in our direction. So they do work really well. So, you know, while I would say, if you can go for single band antennas, you know, do, but you will get a lot of performance out of the log periodics. So they must be, I suppose, some sort of compromise, but actually they work really well. So I'd be very positive about using them.
The next quick question, not to stay up too long, is my next QTH is going to be moving soon, and the next QTH has 2 stations, a station either side of me within, well, one's within about 300 yards, and the other one's in about 600 yards. And they're both reasonably powerful stations. So I'm thinking about putting a Yagi in the attic and using it. They will be north and south to me, so I'm going to be using it east and west on a small rotator in the attic. The question I have with that is, am I better doing it on the inside with them being so close, or would it not make a difference putting it on the outside of the attic?
Oh, yeah, if you can put your aerial outside, I would definitely put your aerial outside. You know, that I'm sure they will be quite strong and all that sort of stuff, but you won't necessarily always be transmitting at the same time, and you know, hopefully get on well, and you know, you'll give each other a bit of a break. You know, with Andy, who's quite close to me here. We're both quite loud with each other, and you know, we do our best not to trample on each other. So, you know, I think goodwill goes a long way with these things. But no, you know, put the aerial outside if you can, because it will work so much better than it would if it were in the loft. If putting a loft aerial up is the only game in town, then, you know, do that, and you'll get some surprising performance out of it. But yeah, if you can put it outside, then you'll get a lot more out of it, I think. So yeah, good luck with that. I look forward to it.
The next quick question, I'm sorry for tying up here, but the next question is, when you were talking earlier about the aircraft scatter, is there any, should you say, prediction for that? Or is there any way at a certain time, or when a flight's a certain distance away from you?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, because I should have talked about that. There's some software. It's called Air Scout, and I think the URL is airscout.eu. And what it does is it allows you to sort of plot your position on the map and the station that you're trying to work, for example. And then it takes all the data from Flight Radar 24 and overlays it. And it actually shows you when some aircraft are actually coming onto the path, and you should see a reflection of the signals. It's absolutely fantastic. If you fancy playing with it, you can use it to, say, listen to perhaps the 2-meter beacon down in Kent on 144.430, and you probably, or the beacon in Cornwall. You probably find that as aircraft pass between you, then you'll see some reflections. So yeah, the Air Scout software is fantastic. So give that a go, and it's free.
That's always a good thing, isn't it? And you also, this is the last question, I promise. If I can read it right. Yes, when you talked about the cloud scatter, does that show up on any weather systems as atmospheric changes, or is it purely just cloud scatter you're looking for?
So yeah, probably I should have been a little bit clearer. So I was thinking about sporadic E clouds, which cause ionization. So they're not necessarily, well, I'll say they are not the clouds that we see above us. Although there is some speculation that the noctilucent clouds that you might see in the summer have something to do with sporadic E, but I'm not sure that we're sort of completely sold on that idea yet. So no, there's, in terms of an actual weather map, if you like, for sporadic E, there isn't anything. But if you have a look at the PropQuest website that Jim G3YLA puts together, he tries to overlay all these factors and give you an idea of where the sporadic E clouds are, or the clouds that reflect the signals. And I think you might find that quite interesting. So it is kind of where, because there are various, we could talk about sporadic E for a very long time, and I'd probably give you a very bad talk compared to Jim Bacon G3YLA, but there are various triggers to it, of which things like meteoric dust might be one of them, wind shear might be another, and so on and so forth. So there are weather factors involved, but not the only ones. So it's a sort of composite effect, if you like.
Okay, thank you very much for answering the questions. Great talk. I'll let somebody else get some space now.
Great. Ken, I seen you had your hand up there. Is that a bye-bye or is that a question?
It's really it's a goodbye. I've got to go anyway.
Okay.
Just a phone call. But yeah, I found it very, very interesting. See, I used to play 2 meters or 2 meters of 77s in the days of Meteor. So it's gone a long way since then. But yeah, I was quite impressed. I was impressed with the number of squares you worked in Europe, because propagation hasn't been that brilliant. But yeah, thank you very much. Interesting talk, Tim.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. I'm going to disappear.
All the best.
Bye. All the best for Christmas, all of you.
You too.
Okay. Anyone have any final questions? Okay. Simon, if you don't mind, we'll go to Stan first because he hasn't asked a question, and then we'll finish up there with yourself. So go ahead, Stan. I think we're having a few microphone issues there, Stan. We can't really hear you there. Okay, well, Simon, do you want to go ahead with your question there, and maybe sure, Stan, you can get your microphone sorted out, and we'll get you on the next one.
Yeah, it was just a comment there when the aircraft scatter and this software. in September, when we were allowed out for a day, I went QRP portable on 2, and I was amazed. Some friends up at the Finningley Club were actually using that, chatting to each other, and they were saying, "Just a moment, wait a moment. There's a Boeing whatever 780 coming over Sutton Coldfield any moment now," and you could hear their signals just coming up. And I was just using a Halo on the back of the van. So all this software stuff is brilliant. How it aggregates all this data, a lot easier than many decades ago. So if you can get these things, and the same with there's one which is Troposcatter as well as the other stuff. Really good. So that you know, if you can have a go, it's really good. And that was it.
Great stuff.
And I'll mute my mic.
Okay. Yeah, Terry, go ahead.
Yes, good evening, everybody. And yes, thanks very much indeed, Tim, for the talk. I was a little bit late coming in, but I'll catch that up on YouTube later. Very grateful indeed for the heads up on Meteor Scatter. I've been trying that or trying to receive something on Meteor Scatter for a few months now, and I have to say, not very well. That's using just a V2000, a vertical white stick. But not knowing that 6 meters was so much better than 2, maybe I shall change bands, and the plethora of various modes and the frequencies thereon. So now I go for MSK 144. Now I go for 280, and see what I can do. Thanks very much, Tim. Much appreciated. You could just save a bit of interest for me.
Brilliant. Well, hopefully that's going to work well over the next few days, because the Geminid shower should see a reasonable amount of activity on 280, and then around the 3rd and 4th of January, you should see plenty of activity there as well. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed for you that you should get some good reflection. 2 meters ought to be possible as well. You know, I have seen some 2 meter reflections just using a vertical, you know, quite frequently. You don't see many. You know, it's not like you're going to make a QSO, but you very often get enough of an FT8 period on 144, 174 to, you know, decode a DL or something like that. So yeah, keep my fingers crossed for you on 2 as well. It should work.
Well, anything. I just want to see a ping. I was up with the Cambridge crowd over the last few years, and I've seen Gavin do lots of scatters, yeah. And I think that is just magic. You can hear it, you can see it, and sometimes you can decode it, but not down here so far. But now you point me in the right direction. Thanks, Tim.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else, sir? George, of course, go ahead.
The joys of losing focus on the application and the PTT not working. George GW4VXE, thank you very much, first of all, Tim, for the talk this evening. It's been enlightening as someone who's been on VHF, not really on UHF, but on VHF on 2 meters for many, many years, from when I got licensed first, and done some of the weak signal stuff. I've learned some new stuff, especially around Meteor scatter tonight. This year was the first year I made a Meteor scatter contact on MSK 144, and it certainly beats the old days of high-speed CW or shouting 262626 into a microphone. I see you laughing. So you had mentioned about a few QSOs, and I checked my log, and yeah, back in '89 we worked during one of the big auroras on CW, and we've worked a couple of times this year on 80 CW and on 2 meters FT8. So it's nice to have an audio conversation instead of data modes in CW. I am trying to get onto 70 SEMS for weak signal work. at the moment, and sort of a toss-up between a shorter Yagi with a wider bandwidth or beam width, or a longer Yagi with a narrower beam width. And I wonder what your opinions would be. I've got space for one Yagi. Ideally two would be nice, but I've got space for one.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting questions. I think because of where you are and that the majority of activity, well, you're not going to have very many stations calling you off the back of the beam, or potentially even off the side of the beam. So I'm thinking one long Yagi with lots of forward gain is probably a really good way to go, you know, where you are. I think my answer would be different if we were having this conversation, you know, and you were in the middle of England or something like that, where signals can, you know, come at you from all sorts of angles. But you know, it's one of the things I find here is that, you know, by and large, I don't have to move the beam an awful lot. I mean, you obviously do, but it's not like you're sort of moving it sort of all the time. So yeah, I think I'd probably be tempted to go for a long Yagi, but fingers crossed. It'd be nice to work you on 77s. I'm sure we'll do that really easily.
Yeah, well, of about 70 watts at the radio, and there's about 3 dB gain between the two antennas that I'm looking at. So I think moving the antenna a bit more often is something minor to worry about when I'm getting.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you're doing I suppose the answer is different if you're a DXer as opposed to a contester. You know, as a contester, you might want to be sort of heard a little bit more widely, so, you know, slightly wider lobes or whatever. But as a DXer, I guess I would go for the maximum forward gain.
Yeah, that's the way I was sort of heading, but I thought I'd get your opinion. It matches what I was thinking, so yeah.
And thanks for the QSOs as well. That's brilliant.
Yes, yeah, I looked it up, and we had some good auroras in 1989.
We don't seem to get auroras anymore, do we?
Well, we might have one tomorrow. There was an event came off the sun, and it's partially Earth directed, so they're expecting it. If we get any effect, it'll be tomorrow.
Interesting.
Okay. I think we're questioned out, Tim. It's been great having you along, and I don't see any desperately waving hands there. So if you're catching us here on the YouTube, we hope you've enjoyed. Folks, Merry Christmas from all of us here at the Mid-Ulster Amateur Radio Club, and we'll see you on the second Tuesday in January for our Tuesday night lecture series as we kick off a new year. So from us, the team, Tim, thanks again for a great evening. It's been great thought provoking topic again of the VHF and UHF, and it's always good to think about these things. So from us, folks, 7-3, and we'll catch you later.
All the best. Bye-bye.